Well, hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us for this online version of our message here at Deep Rivers Church as we wind down the month of April. Next Saturday will be the first Saturday of the month. So that means the women will be meeting for breakfast at our house, 9 a.m., 417 West High Street. So if you haven't been able to join them, please do. They always have a great time. And I've been working on the house, so you can see I got a few more things done. Let's jump into it. We started a new sermon series last weekend. Pastor Craig Mark spoke for us. Nicole and I were out of town. So he started the new sermon series called Jesus is Better. Jesus is Better Than. And so we're going to continue on with that. I saw a t-shirt as I was looking through my feed, and it was a woman wearing a t-shirt that said, "I've had 21 abortions." And what was odd about it was like a professionally printed t-shirt. It wasn't like she just got a marker and wrote out that on there. And the picture pretty much celebrating the fact that she's pro-choice and has the ability to terminate a pregnancy. I don't know, I Googled the 21 shirt thing. I worked up the courage to Google it. I never really did figure out where the number 21 came from. I didn't want to dig into it that much. But our culture celebrates. She was celebrating the ability to terminate a life. So when I saw that, and even when I tell you the story, are you filled with love and compassion for that woman? Or you kind of feel a feeling of disdain or maybe even disgust. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have love and compassion for this woman wearing the t-shirt. In fact, it took me a while to work up some sympathy for her, but my first reaction, it was not love. We are talking about how Jesus is better, and this week we're talking about God's agenda is a plan for us to love people. Jesus is better. His plan, his agenda for us to react differently than our natural inclination would be. That's the better part. It is better. Jesus' plan, Jesus' agenda is better. Luke chapter 6 is the Sermon on the Plain. You might have heard of the Sermon on the Mount before. This is kind of the lesser known. Anybody know who Jim Hanks and Danny Depp are? You might be able to guess. Those are the brothers of Tom Hanks and Johnny Depp. Sermon on the Plain is sort of like Jim Hanks and Danny Depp. Not as well known, obviously, but still exists, but not as well known as their famous brother. The Sermon on the Plain, very similar to the Sermon on the Mount, certainly is not as well known. But this is what Jesus had to say at the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6, 46 through 40. He says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, they are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, and it could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who builds his house in the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." I had the thought this week. Our current culture has cut the kite string. Now, you see a kite and you might think, wow, too bad it has a string on it. If you could cut that string, then it could go and do whatever it wants. Well, in reality, the tension helps keep the kite in the air. You relieve the tension, you cut the cord. What's going to happen to the kite? For a quick second, it's going to fly off, but it's going to crash pretty quick because its flight is dependent on the tension. Our culture has cut the kite string. We found that tether of God's word to be too restrictive. So we've cut it and look at the sort of chaos that is result. This is what Jesus is saying. How do we build a better house? We build our better house by putting it on the rock of God's foundation. That's the better house. God's agenda is a plan to love, and he unfolds that. Same chapter, verse 27 through 31. But to you who are listening, difference between hearing and listening, I guess. There's a difference between being exposed to it and truly listening. But to those who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asked you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Well, that's a pretty hard, what's the word? Not hard words, but they get your attention. We're just going to knock this out phrase by phrase. Love your enemies. Shockingly simple to understand, but really, really hard to do. I understand it in my head. Pretty big disconnect between what I understand and how I feel. The good news is Jesus has told us how to do it. So he's given us some directions. He says this, do good, bless, and pray for those who mistreat you. Now, first point, Jesus recognized that we will have enemies. So here's the question. If you have no enemies, are you too friendly with the world? Are you kind of going with the flow? Someone said, if you don't see the devil, maybe you're swimming in the same direction. Or you don't run across the devil. That's a better phrase. You don't run across the devil, maybe you're swimming in the same direction. So Jesus recognized, said, we're going to have enemies. Yet we respond in love. Why? Because we trust God will protect our cause, which actually is his cause. He will deal justly with the people who need to be dealt with. Hopefully, they will be transformed. Hopefully, the woman wearing the t-shirt will be transformed, but it's God's cause. It's not my cause. It's God's cause. Why was I so angry at the lady in the t-shirt? Maybe there's an element of righteous indignation, but maybe it's also a possibility that I have a fear that God won't address that situation. Think about that. Do I trust God to be a God of justice, or do I think he's sleeping and not seeing what's going on? Do I want him to only act definitively on obvious sin, but not my hidden sin? It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling. Love is not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's what we do, it's our actions, but it's also what we think. Now, here's kind of a challenging thing to say. Her t-shirt and my reaction to her t-shirt can both be sinful. Jesus has a different way. Jesus' way is better. Jesus is better than just reacting in anger or disgust. Not easy, but that's the challenge. Jesus said, bless those who curse you. Now, when you hear the word curse, there's two definitions that might pop into your head. You might think, oh, a curse is something like a witch doctor does. It's like a spell. I put a curse on you. You might have seen it in the movies or hear about witch doctors and all those kinds of things. Or maybe you think of the word profanity. Did you curse? I said something that, an element of profanity. But in reality, I think what the verse is saying is, bless those who curse you, because there's power in the tongue. There's power in what we say. And here's the challenge. We must speak well of those who speak ill against us. That's not easy. I have my one. I have a lot of situations, but there's one that makes it tough for me. We must speak well of those who speak ill against us. Gossip is a big, big, big problem. Big problem out of the church, big problem in the church. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it can be pretty sneaky. Here's a phrase I came across, a sentence. We cannot love our enemies as we love our nearest and dearest. To do so would be unnatural and impossible. But we can see to it that no matter what someone does to us, we could still seek nothing but their highest good. Jesus is better. He has a different plan. He wants us to seek others' good, even if they speak ill against us. If someone slaps you on one cheek, he said, turn the other also. Jesus said this, we must accept certain evils committed against us. Now, when we're hurt, we want to pay back. When we're hurt, even if we don't intentionally do something to pay them back, we secretly find a little level of gladness when something bad happens to them. I'm no different. But we must accept that certain evils are going to be committed against us. It's not our place to pay back. Jesus said this. Basically, he's saying we must patiently bear offenses. Now, there was Jewish writings, the Mishnah, I think it's book 8, book 8, 6. Chapter 8, verse 6, I think, in the Mishnah. And this is what it says. One who wounds his neighbor is liable to pay for the following 5 things. Damage, pain, healing, I think that means their care, loss of time, and disgrace. Which is saying this. Disgrace is, back in the times of the scripture, back in Jesus' time, I should say, striking someone with the back of the hand was punishable by a heavy fine. Even if they were not injured, they were disgraced. And they would be held liable that you could be punished for disgracing somebody. Here's what Jesus is saying. We bear and endure disgrace even when legally we could benefit from it. This is what Jesus is saying. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. What he's saying is if someone shows you a measure of disgrace, don't pursue what you legally could, even according to the old Jewish writing. Jesus never meant, we got to clarify, Jesus never meant that evil should not be addressed. I mean, he saw evil and he went after it. But the true Christian has learned to not resent an insult or seek retaliation for an offense. Ooh, how about that line? The true Christian has learned to not resent an insult or seek retaliation for an offense. So what's the key word in that last sentence I just read? A couple of them might jump out at you. The true Christian has learned to not resent an insult or seek retaliation for an offense. Well, I think you can make the argument that the key word in that sentence might actually be the word learned, because this does not happen naturally. We need to learn this. This is a discipline. This is something that we need to pray into our character and work on. Jesus was insulted. You know, he was called a glutton. He was called a drunk, an illegitimate child, a blasphemer, a madman. Yet, he lived by this principle himself. Okay. Even though Jesus got angry, he was able to do it in a way that we probably can't. We're not Jesus. Jesus was confrontational with religious leaders. But if you look at the grand scope of his life, he lived this principle. Wrong thought number 1, just to clarify, it's wrong to think Jesus meant physical attacks cannot be resisted or defended. That's not what he's saying with the slap on the cheek. Again, it was culturally understood as a deep insult, not just a physical attack. And then the wrong thought number 2 is to think that Jesus never meant there was a place for punishment or retribution in society. What he's doing is he's addressing personal relationships here, not functions of government. So we need to be clear on that. The next phrase, if someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. All right, now the law of Moses said the outer cloak could not be taken from someone. Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy 24. The cloak, you could not take somebody's cloak. I guess, it's so important to them. And a source of shelter and protection. So even the law of Moses said you could not take their coat or their cloak. But Jesus is saying this: disciples will gladly part with what they may legally keep. Man, that's a challenge, isn't it? Jesus said his followers would gladly part with what legally they could keep. Though the old way, Jesus is contrasting the old with the new. The old way says, insist on your own right, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, and secure your own safety. And Jesus is saying there's a new way, a better way. Jesus is better. The new way, suffer wrong and lavish love on all. The next phrase from this sermon, Jesus' sermon, not just this sermon, not this message, but Jesus' sermon. If anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Now, that's hard, but we can do this. It's easier to do this when we know that God will take care of us. God has plenty of tunics to give us. Why do you fear losing your cloak? Why would you fear giving up something that belongs to you and not demanding it back? It's not just an element of pride. It's an element of security. It's an element of, will God provide? But there's also an important point in all of this. The only limit is the limit that love itself imposes. So we think, here's Jesus is saying, if someone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Well, the only limit to this is the limit that love itself imposes. I want you to think about that. There is limits to this. And the limit is what love itself imposes. It's not loving to someone to give in to their scheming, their manipulation, and their sinful actions. You show love by saying no sometimes. We watched a movie recently called Beautiful Boy, and it wasn't a popular movie. But it was a movie about a family dealing with their son's drug addiction and how this kid who seemed to have it all started slipping into the drug culture and just could not handle it well. And eventually the family had to say no to him, which was really hard for them to do. It's not loving to give into someone's sin. And so the only limits to showing love to others are the only limit is the limit that love itself imposes. It's not loving to give in or to not resist the things that are bad for other people. So think about that. That's a thought. That could be a Friday Linger thought, couldn't it? I did the Friday Linger video earlier today. The only limit, and that would be something for us to linger on, the only limit to love is the limit that love itself imposes. The last phrase, do to others as you would have them do to you. Now, traditionally, for a long time, people have said the negative. Do not do to your neighbor what you do not want them to do to you. So they just kind of cast it in the negative. Jesus comes along and spins it, for lack of a better word, to the positive. He presents it in the positive. Do to others what you would want them to do to you. So now many people think of this as the golden rule. The golden rule is not invented by Jesus, but it's found in many places, many forms. In 20 AD, give or take, we don't know exactly when, there was a guy named Rabbi Hillel, and this is what he said became noteworthy. What is hateful to you, do not do to anyone else. So when Jesus is saying this, he's saying it in the context of what the rabbi said. He's kind of taking the opposite approach. He's flipping it. The rabbi, this well-known rabbi, in Jesus's in Jesus' lifetime, I think, what is hateful to you, do not do to anyone else. Jesus phrased the rule positively and made it much broader. The old way, basically the rabbi is saying, don't break traffic laws, avoid the negative. And Jesus is saying there's a new way. It's doing something positive. It's how can you help the stranded driver? Jesus is better. Jesus' agenda for us and the world is better. Now, oftentimes it's quite opposite of the world, and oftentimes it is very difficult for us to do. But again, look at the fruit of what happens when people cut the kite string. You can see it played out in the confusion and a lack of objective reality, and everyone does what's right in their own eyes. God's plan is better. God's agenda is better. So the question is, all right, what is God's agenda for you in these 4 areas of your life? How can you live opposite of the world expectation in these 4 areas at home? What is God's agenda for you at home? How can you show love at home? Same is true for work. What is God's agenda for you at work? How can you do the opposite of everyone else? What is God's agenda for you with your friends? In church, out of church? And then what is God's agenda for you when you see the world playing out? Again, I'm never going to run into the lady wearing the t-shirt. But what is God's agenda? What is my hope for my reaction to that? So those are just 4 areas, at home, work, friends, and in the world. How can we live out God's agenda, loving others sacrificially instead of our own? Jesus is better. His plan, his agenda is better than living reactionary lives where we only think of ourselves first and foremost, which is what the world does. All right. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us. I hope that we'll see you again sometime soon. Take care and God bless. Bye.